Here we have Sunni and Shiite. So we saw this before, that Sunni Islam is about 86 to 88% of Muslims. And as we were speaking about when Dr. Shafi was talking about Islamic law, that it will be divided between 4 schools of Islamic law, but Muslims don't see this as dividing them, meaning we are Hanafis, you are Malikis, we are somehow different. These are different schools of law, but they will have basically the same theological understanding of the tradition with some minor variations, but we're not going to get into the schools of theology. Now, within Sunni Islam, an important distinction here, and we're not making them as separate groups, you'll also have groups that we know today as the Salafis and the Wahhabis, because they basically come from the same strand. And they will follow, for example, incorporate the same sayings of the Prophet Muhammad and things along these lines. All right, Shiite Islam, 11 to 13% of Muslims. As we're going to see in a minute, this is where things start to get complicated with the different groups that you have among the Shiites. Now, the basic difference between the Sunni Muslims and the Shiite Muslims is the interpretation of how the succession to the Prophet should have unfolded. It's important to put it that way, how the succession should have unfolded. The reason it's important is because people tend to project the Sunni-Shiite divide to the immediate death of the Prophet ﷺ. Whereas in fact, those who are later identified as the Shi'i heroes and the Sunnis continued to be part of the same community. Ali ibn Abi Talib, who is the 4th of the Sunni caliphs, ruled from 656 to 661, is understood by Shiites to have been the rightful ruler of the community. And then they maintain that after that, his eldest son Hassan should have been the next leader, and then his son Hussein, his second son Hussein, and then from Hussein comes the line of Shiite Imams. For the majority of Shiites, we could call them 12er Shiites or Imami Shiites. This is the vast majority of Shiites. This goes through 12 Imams. The 12th Imam then went into occultation. In other words, he is still alive. And he is in occultation. He is the Mahdi who will come back at the end of time to restore justice and true Islam. All right. Now, there is also a belief in a Mahdi within Sunni Islam, but that Mahdi is believed to be a person who will have a natural birth, will be a descendant of the Prophet, and will come back towards the end of time to reestablish Islam and justice for a 7-year period. Don't want to get into that right now. But this is basically the distinction. The actual real separation between Sunnis and Shiites starts to occur after the death of Ali ibn Abi Talib. And so a little bit during his life, but it's really after his death, and it becomes extremely pronounced in the Abbasid period. It's always there in the Umayyad period as well. They're trying to manage it in some different ways, but it becomes very pronounced in the Abbasid period, and that's in a sense at the point at which there is kind of no going back to a unified political vision of the tradition. But again, it's important to note that the Ibadis were actually the first ones, in a sense, to separate their own community, and I'm going to get into that in just a minute. Now, the Imami Shiites, or the 12ers, are about 150 million in the world, probably a little bit more now, because if we're going to say that there are about 1.5 billion Muslims in the world, and it's 11 to 13%, so we're probably saying around 170 million. So 150 to 175 million in the world today. These are the countries in which you will find them. Among these, you end up with a surprise in Saudi Arabia. There are Shiite communities in northern Saudi Arabia. In fact, this is a big problem for them because they tend to be in some of the very oil-rich parts of Saudi Arabia. Azerbaijan, you also have small communities in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and India. The Shiite majority countries are Iran, Iraq, Azerbaijan, and Bahrain. And they are the largest community in Lebanon. Lebanon has lots of different religious communities. It is a very religiously kind of complicated place. As one person I said is that said Lebanon is a contradiction, but we won't get into that now. It's a wonderful place, but it has a lot of different things going on when it comes to the various religious communities, the Malachites, the Christians, the Catholics, and the Sunni populations as well. All right, now here we have the kind of distribution again that I mentioned before. You can see a little pocket down there. These are not 12 Imam Shiites. We're going to talk about them in a minute. Those are Zaydis. And here in these areas are where you have the concentrations of 12 Imam Shiism, for the most part. And again, here in Afghanistan and in pockets in various places in Pakistan. And then you would also see little pockets, in a sense, in places in India. All right, any questions right now?
Did the Shias kind of move to be with themselves and then sort of stay there, or did they convert? I guess I'm wondering why the concentration in that certain area, those certain areas.
You know, these get into very political things because this area right here was actually, which is 90% plus Shiite today, is actually historically one of the most important regions for the development of Sunni Islam. Some of the greatest theologians, the greatest hadith collectors of Islamic history are from these areas that were historically Sunni, and it wasn't actually until the 16th century that they became predominantly Shiite under the rise of the Safavid Empire. And the Safavids, they actually, one of the things that the Safavids did was to kind of try to concentrate 12 Imam Shiites in that territory in order to build up 12 Imam theology and scholarship as well. So some of the communities in other places were, in a sense, almost depleted by the rise of 12 Imam Shiism in Iran. Any other questions?
Are you about to talk about how they're different in practice?
The practice really is actually I've lived in Yemen, which is kind of 50%, almost 50% Shiite, but Zaydis. I've lived in Morocco. I've lived in UAE, Egypt, Jordan, and Iran. I was in Iran for 3 months one time. Really, I mean, there's a kind of an emphatic element within Shiism as well, but it's the differences are really quite minimal in the actual practice. There are a few things. They pray the 5 daily prayers. The 12 Imams will actually have 2 interpretations. Some say that you can always join the 2 afternoon prayers and the sunset prayer and the night prayer, and others continue to pray them separately. Within 12 Imam Shiism, you are also allowed in the last 2 rak'ah. Did you all go through the rak'ah and the salat and how the salat is performed? And so in the afternoon prayers, you do 4 of them. They say in the last 2, some say you don't actually have to recite the Fatiha, that you recite a formula of praise in that. And this is under your breath, so it's something that you would hardly see. Now, one of the things that comes down is what is really fundamentally important, where they really differ, is in their theology. Okay, for 12 Imam Shiites, and the reason that we can call them Imamis, for the Shiites, theology rotates around the Imam. The Imam is the axis of the theology. It is not simply a political divide. In some ways it may have been at first, but it is really that the Imam is considered to be really kind of a focal point of creation, in fact. And this is why they say that the Imam has to be in occultation, because literally the universe would collapse if there were not a living Imam, according to some. But there's actually this almost what you might say metaphysical function of the Imam in history. All right. Now, one of the main things where they differ, and a lot of Sunnis don't know this about them, and when they hear them about the 12 Imam Shiites, they're like, whoa, okay, forget that. But it's that for the 12 Shiites, the Imam is actually considered to be of a greater state of what you call sanctity or wilaya than previous prophets. Not then the Prophet Muhammad, but then previous prophets. And that's where Sunnis would just say, no way. All right? Yes?
No, I still have a hard time with you.
So, but between the two, Imam doesn't mean the same thing.
Imam has 4 different meanings in Islam.
Yeah,
Imam can mean one, the person who's leading the prayer. Dr. Shafi is our Imam here. He leads us in prayer when we gather. So it can mean the person who leads the prayer. An Imam can also be the Imam, and these are Sunni definitions. An Imam can also be the person who is kind of the head of the local mosque. The person is, say, Imam, let's say I was working at a mosque, let's say Imam Lombard, all right? And then the Imam can also be a great scholar in Sunni history who's considered to be kind of one of the most foundational scholars of some kind. Like, for example, we were talking about the founders of the schools of Islamic law. We would say Imam Malik, the founder of the Maliki school of law, Imam Shafi, Imam Abu Hanifa, the founder of the Hanafi school of law, all right? Then you have the 12 Imam Shiites. Imam is the most confusing term in Islam, probably about the most confusing term, because then Imam is used in about 5 different ways in the Quran as well. Imam is even used to mean like a registry in the Quran. So it's a very complex term because an Imam basically means a leader, all right? And so it then becomes the official term that is used for leader, but it has specific technical designations in different contexts.
I missed one of your definitions for
Sunni's Imam. I think you said there were 4. You got the person who leads prayer, the head of the mosque, the great scholar.
And those are the 3 for Sunni Islam.
Oh, okay.
And then the 4th is a Shiite Imam.
Oh, I see. Okay.